Mom, we need to talk about your medication, Evelyn said, her voice too careful. I was sitting in my kitchen with a cup of cooling tea, the late afternoon sun cutting through the window like a blade. My daughter stood across from me, her hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "What about it?" I asked, though something in her tone made my stomach tighten. I'd been taking those medications for 14 months now. 14 months since the diagnosis that had rewritten my entire life into before and after. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. It was my medication bottle, my adriamycin, the chemotherapy drug that was supposed to be saving my life. But something was wrong with the image. The liquid inside looked diluted, almost clear, instead of the deep red it should have been. "I found this in the kitchen yesterday," Evelyn whispered. "I was looking for your pain medication because you said you were out. But I found this instead. And Rileyetta, I tested it." The room went very still. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The cup in my hand started to slip, and I had to set it down on the saucer with deliberate care. "Tested it? How?" My voice sounded like it was coming from someone else, someone very far away. "I have a friend who works in pharmaceutical quality control." I didn't tell her what it was. I just said I was concerned about a medication someone was taking. She ran tests on a sample. "The concentration is less than 30% of what it should be. Rileyetta, someone has been diluting your chemotherapy medication." I stood up from the chair. I had to stand. Sitting still felt like drowning. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in, the air too thick to breathe. 14 months. I had been taking diluted medication for 14 months. The cancer wasn't responding to treatment because I wasn't actually receiving treatment. I was receiving something close to water with a hint of poison. "Who has access to your medication?" Evelyn asked, but I already knew. I already knew exactly who had access. The same people who had access to everything in my life. The realization crashed over me like a wave. My son Jaron and his wife Nalaya had moved into my house 6 months ago. They said it was temporary. They said they needed help with money. They said they wanted to be close to me while I was sick. They had been so attentive, so caring. Nalaya had even taken over managing my medications because I was tired, she said. Because it would be easier for me. Because she wanted to help. I gripped the counter and felt the cold granite against my palms. The edges bit into my skin. Everything I had believed about the past 6 months suddenly inverted. Every kindness became a question. Every gesture became a weapon. "We need to go to the hospital," Evelyn said. "We need to tell them. We need to get you tested again. We need to know what this has actually done to you." But I couldn't move. I was thinking about Jaron, my son, the boy I had carried for 9 months, the child I had raised and loved and supported through everything. I was thinking about how he had sat beside my bed when I was sick from the chemotherapy, how he had held my hand and told me I was going to be okay, how he had lied to my face while poisoning me. "Rileyetta?" Evelyn's voice was sharp with fear. "Are you okay?" I wasn't okay. I would never be okay again. But I nodded anyway because I didn't have any other choice. I grabbed my purse. I grabbed my jacket. I grabbed the diluted medication bottle from where Evelyn held it out to me, and I looked at it like I was looking at a snake. The drive to the hospital took 23 minutes. I counted them. I counted every single one because counting was easier than thinking. Evelyn drove. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. She kept glancing at me like she was afraid I might disappear. Dr. Kevin Mendez had been my oncologist since the diagnosis. He was a man in his early 60s with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen too much suffering. When I walked into his office with Evelyn and the medication bottle, something in his expression shifted. He knew. Before I said a single word, he knew something was terribly wrong. I set the bottle on his desk and told him what we had discovered. I watched his face as I spoke. I watched the way his eyes went darker, the way his hand reached out and picked up the bottle like it might bite him, the way he held it up to the light and his entire body went rigid. "This is not the medication I prescribed," he said quietly. "This is not the concentration I prescribed. This is—" He stopped. He set the bottle down very carefully. "Who has access to your medications?" "My son and his wife," I said. The words felt like broken glass in my mouth. "They live with me?" Dr. Mendez stood up and walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at the parking lot below, his hands clasped behind his back. When he turned back to face me, his expression was carefully controlled, but I could see the anger underneath it, the rage that he was trying very hard to contain. "We need to run tests," he said. "Full blood work. Imaging. We need to understand what's happened to your body over the past 6 months. And then we need to involve the police." The word police hung in the air like a curse. My son, the police. Those two things didn't belong in the same sentence. They belonged in different universes, but they were colliding now, and there was no way to separate them. The blood tests took 3 hours. The imaging took another 2. I sat in waiting rooms with Evelyn, and we didn't talk. There was nothing to say. The silence between us was heavy with all the things we both understood, but couldn't speak aloud. By the time Dr. Mendez called us back into his office, it was dark outside. The sun had set while I was learning the extent of the betrayal. "The cancer has progressed significantly," Dr. Mendez said, and each word was a hammer blow. "The tumors have grown. They're spread to the lymph nodes that wasn't present 6 months ago. The diluted medication has allowed the cancer to advance, while your body thought it was being treated." "I'm sorry, Rileyetta. I'm very sorry." I looked at the scans he showed me. I looked at the images of my own body betraying me. I looked at the evidence of my son's betrayal, written in the language of cells and tumors and metastasis. And I felt something inside me crystallize. Something hard and cold and absolutely certain. "What do we do now?" I asked. Dr. Mendez outlined the plan. More aggressive chemotherapy, different drugs, possibly surgery. Definitely a conversation with law enforcement. The treatment plan was aggressive because it had to be. My cancer was angry now. It had been fed by negligence and malice, and it had grown fat on my suffering. I drove home alone that night. Evelyn wanted to come with me, but I told her no. I needed to see Jaren and Nalaya. I needed to look them in the eye. I needed to understand how 2 people could do this to someone they claimed to love. The house was dark when I arrived. I turned on the lights in the kitchen and made coffee. I sat at the table and waited. At 11 o'clock, Jaren came downstairs in his pajamas, his hair messed up from sleep. "Mom, what are you doing up so late?" He looked genuinely concerned. That was the part that made me want to scream. The concern looked real. The care looked real. But it was all performance. It was all a mask over something rotten. "I went to the hospital today," I said, and I watched his face carefully. "I had tests done. Dr. Mendez wanted to check on my progress." Jaren sat down at the table across from me. He reached out like he was going to take my hand, and I pulled away. His expression shifted. Something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or fear. "Mom, what's wrong?" His voice had changed. The concern was gone. Now there was something else. Something calculating. "My medication has been diluted," I said. Each word was precise. Each word was a stone I was laying down between us. "For 6 months, I've been taking chemotherapy medication that's less than 30% of the prescribed concentration. Someone has been deliberately weakening my medicine. Someone has been deliberately allowing my cancer to grow." Jaren's face went white. He stood up from the table very quickly, knocking his chair backward. It clattered on the tile floor like a gunshot. "That's insane," he said. "I would never—" "You had access," I said. "You and Nalaya. You were the only ones who had access to my medications. You were the only ones who knew where I kept them. You were the only one I trusted to help me." "Mom, listen to me." Jaren started, but I cut him off. "No, you listen to me. I've spent 14 months fighting for my life. 14 months of poison in my veins, thinking it was medicine. 14 months of believing my cancer was just aggressive. 14 months of watching my son and his wife take care of me while they were killing me." Nalaya appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like she had just woken up, but her eyes were sharp and awake. She took in the scene immediately. Jaren standing with his hands clenched. Me sitting at the table with the medication bottle in front of me. The evidence of everything laid bare. "What's happening?" she asked, but her voice was careful, controlled. "I know what you did," I said, looking directly at her. "I know you've been diluting my medication. I know you've been deliberately sabotaging my treatment. I want to know why." Nalaya and Jaren exchanged a glance. It was quick, but I saw it. I saw the communication that passed between them in that single moment. They were connected. They were aligned. They had done this together. "We didn't do anything," Nalaya said, but her voice had changed. The careful concern was gone. Now there was something hard underneath, something cruel. "We were helping you." "Helping me die," I said. "That's what you were doing." Jaren moved toward me, and I stood up quickly. The chair scraped backward. I moved to the other side of the counter, putting distance between us. "Mom, you don't understand," Jaren said. "You don't understand what's been happening." "Then explain it to me," I said. "Explain to me why you would do this. Explain to me why you would move into my house and pretend to care for me while you poisoned me." "Because you were never going to die," Nalaya shouted, and the words came out like venom. "You kept saying you were sick, but you weren't sick enough. You kept saying you were dying, but you kept living. Do you know how long we've been waiting? Do you know how long we've been stuck in this house, taking care of you, waiting for you to finally—" "Finally what?" I asked, and my voice was very quiet. "Finally die so you could inherit my money?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of confession. It was the silence of guilt laid bare. "How much?" I asked. "How much is my life worth to you?" $800,000, Jaren said, and there was no point in lying anymore. The truth was out. The secret was exposed. "Your house, your savings, your investments, everything you've built, we were going to get it all." I looked at my son. I looked at this man I had raised and loved and supported. I looked at the stranger wearing his face. "I want you out of my house," I said. "Both of you. I want you gone by morning." "You can't do that," Nalaya said. "We have rights. We live here." We're family. You're nothing to me, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. You're worse than nothing. You're a cancer, and I'm going to cut you out. I walked past them and went upstairs to my bedroom. I locked the door and sat on my bed in the dark. I could hear them arguing downstairs. I could hear Jaren's voice rising and falling. I could hear Nalaya's voice sharp and angry, but I didn't listen to the words. I didn't need to hear any more of their lies. I picked up my phone and called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the sleep in her voice clearing as I told her what had happened. I told her about the confrontation. I told her about the confession. I told her about the money and the house and the deliberate attempt to murder me through negligence and malice. I'm calling the police, Evelyn said. I'm coming over. Don't let them leave. Don't let them do anything. They're leaving anyway, I said. I told them to be gone by morning. Rielietta, they might destroy evidence. They might. I know, I said. But I don't care. I just want them out of my house. I just want them out of my life. I hung up and sat in the dark and listened to my son and his wife pack their things. It took them an hour. I heard the sound of drawers opening and closing. I heard the sound of luggage being dragged down the hallway. I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing. I heard the sound of a car starting in the driveway. By the time Evelyn arrived, they were gone. The police came the next morning. There were 2 officers, a man and a woman, both with the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much human cruelty. They took the medication bottle. They took my statement. They took the contact information for Dr. Mendez and for Evelyn's friend who had tested the medication. They told me they would investigate. They told me they would be in touch. This is a serious crime, the female officer said. Her name was Caroline Rivera, and she had kind eyes underneath the exhaustion. Tampering with prescription medication, attempted murder. We'll need you to press charges. I will, I said. I want to press charges. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of police interviews and medical consultations and lawyers explaining my options. 3 weeks of learning that my son and his wife had been planning this for years. They had been dating for 7 years before they married. They had married specifically because Jaren knew I was wealthy. They had been researching ways to hasten my death for months before they moved in. They had studied my medication schedule. They had learned exactly how much to dilute the drugs to avoid detection while still allowing the cancer to progress. It was methodical. It was calculated. It was evil. The police arrested them both on a Tuesday. I watched the news coverage from my living room. I watched my son being led out of the police station in handcuffs. I watched my daughter-in-law's face as she was photographed. I watched the reporters speculate about motive and method. I watched my private nightmare become public spectacle. But I didn't cry. I was too angry to cry. I was too focused on the next step. Dr. Mendez started me on a new, much more aggressive chemotherapy regimen. The side effects were severe. I lost my hair. I lost weight. I spent days in the hospital with infections and complications. But I could feel the medicine working. I could feel it fighting the cancer that had been allowed to grow unchecked. I could feel my body beginning to heal, even as it was being poisoned by the cure. Evelyn stayed with me through it all. She moved into my house. She took care of me. She held my hand during the worst of the nausea and the fever and the despair. She was everything that Jaren and Nalaya had pretended to be, but never actually were. She was real. She was genuine. She was family in the way that mattered. 3 months into the new treatment, Dr. Mendez showed me new scans. The tumors were shrinking. The spread was halting. The cancer was retreating. I was going to live. "You caught it in time," Dr. Mendez said, and there was relief in his voice. "If you'd gone much longer without proper treatment, the outcome would have been very different. You're going to make it, Rielietta." I looked at the scans and felt something break open inside me. Not from grief this time, but from something else. From gratitude. From anger. From the fierce determination to live. I had been given a second chance. I had been given a reprieve from death, and I was going to use every moment of it. The trial started 6 months later. I sat in the courtroom and watched my son and his wife face justice. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. The diluted medication. The research they had done on how to poison someone slowly. The financial records showing their debts and their desperation. The emails between them discussing the plan. The confession I had recorded when I confronted them. Jaren's lawyer tried to argue that he hadn't known what his wife was doing, that Nalaya had acted alone, that he was a victim of her manipulation. But the evidence didn't support that narrative. The emails showed both of them discussing the plan. The financial motive was shared. The crime was collaborative. Nalaya's lawyer tried to argue that I had imagined the whole thing, that I was confused by my medication, that the dilution was accidental, that there was no proof of intent. But Dr. Mendez testified. Evelyn's friend testified. The police testified. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict came on a Thursday in November. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. The judge sentenced them both to 20 years in prison. I sat in the courtroom and watched my son's face as the sentence was read. I watched him understand, finally, that there were consequences for what he had done. That his crime had consequences that would follow him for the rest of his life. That he would spend the next 20 years in a cell, paying for the months he had tried to steal from me. But the victory felt hollow, because the damage was done. The cancer had progressed. The treatment had been delayed. I would spend the rest of my life managing the side effects of the aggressive chemotherapy. I would spend the rest of my life wondering if I would have been cured by now if my medication hadn't been tampered with. I would spend the rest of my life carrying the knowledge of my son's betrayal. A year after the trial, I was in remission. The cancer was gone. The tumors had disappeared. The scans were clear. Dr. Mendez told me I was cancer-free, and I believed him. But I also knew that remission was not the same as cure. The cancer could come back. The cancer could always come back. And I would spend the rest of my life waiting for it to return, knowing that my son had deliberately delayed my treatment, knowing that he had tried to kill me. I sold the house. I couldn't live there anymore. Every room held memories of the deception. Every corner held the ghost of my son's betrayal. I bought a smaller house in a different neighborhood, and I filled it with people I could trust. Evelyn moved in with me. We became more than sisters-in-law. We became family in the truest sense. I started volunteering at the hospital. I started talking to other cancer patients about the importance of managing their own medications. I started telling my story to anyone who would listen. I wanted to warn people. I wanted to help them understand that betrayal could come from the people closest to you. That danger could hide behind concern. That poison could be administered with a smile. 2 years after the trial, Jaren wrote me a letter from prison. I didn't open it for a month. I left it on my kitchen counter and looked at it every day, trying to decide if I wanted to hear what he had to say. Finally, I opened it. He wrote that he was sorry. He wrote that he had been desperate. He wrote that Nalaya had convinced him it was the right thing to do. He wrote that he had been selfish and cruel, and that he understood now that he had destroyed our relationship. He wrote that he hoped I could forgive him someday. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer and never read it again. Forgiveness wasn't something I could give him. Forgiveness wasn't something he deserved. What he deserved was exactly what he had received: justice, consequences, time to think about what he had done. But I did something with the knowledge of his letter. I used it. I used it to understand that even people who betray us are still human. Even people who try to murder us are still capable of remorse. Even people who destroy our trust are still capable of change. And that understanding, while it didn't heal the wound, did help me move forward. I continued my chemotherapy follow-ups. I continued my scans. I continued my blood work. Every 3 months, I went to Dr. Mendez's office and held my breath while he reviewed the results. Every 3 months, he told me that I was still in remission, that the cancer was still gone, that I was still alive. 5 years after the trial, I was declared cancer-free. Not in remission. Actually, genuinely cancer-free. The 5-year mark is significant in oncology. It means that the cancer is unlikely to return. It means that I had survived. It means that my son and his wife had failed in their attempt to kill me. I stood in Dr. Mendez's office and cried. Not from grief this time, but from relief, from gratitude, from the fierce joy of survival. "You made it," Dr. Mendez said, and he was smiling. "You actually made it." "Because you caught it," I said. "Because Evelyn discovered what they were doing. Because I had people around me who loved me enough to fight for me." "Yes," Dr. Mendez said. "But also because you fought, because you survived, because you refused to let their betrayal define the end of your story." I left his office and drove to the beach. Evelyn was waiting for me there. We sat on the sand and watched the sun set over the water. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We had been through too much together for words to matter. "You're free now," Evelyn said finally. "Free from the fear, free from the cancer, free from the worry." "I'm free," I agreed. And it was true. I was free. Not from the memory of the betrayal, not from the knowledge of what my son had tried to do, but free from the immediate fear of death, free from the daily terror of the cancer returning, free to live my life without the shadow of his malice hanging over it. I turned 58 the next month. Evelyn threw me a party. We invited friends and neighbors and people from the support group I had joined. We celebrated life. We celebrated survival. We celebrated the fact that I was here, alive, present, able to enjoy the simple pleasure of cake and laughter and human connection. I thought about my son in prison. I thought about the years he still had to serve. I thought about the fact that he would be an old man by the time he was released. I thought about the life he had thrown away, and I felt something that surprised me. I felt pity, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just pity for the man he had become and the choices he had made. But I didn't dwell on it. I turned my attention back to the party, back to the people who loved me, back to the life I had fought so hard to keep. Evelyn caught me looking at her and smiled. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," I said. "I'm thinking about how I almost didn't get to have this moment. I'm thinking about how my son tried to take this away from me, and he failed." "He did fail," Evelyn said. "And you won." "We won," I corrected her. "I couldn't have done this without you." She took my hand and squeezed it. No more words were necessary. We had already said everything that mattered. I spent the rest of my life telling my story. I wrote articles about medication safety. I gave talks at hospitals and support groups. I worked with the pharmaceutical industry to develop better safeguards against medication tampering. I became an advocate for cancer patients and for anyone who had been betrayed by someone they loved. My story became a warning and a beacon. It warned people about the dangers of trusting without verification. It showed how poison could hide in plain sight. But it also became a beacon of hope. It showed that survival was possible. That betrayal didn't have to be the end of the story. That love and determination could overcome even the darkest betrayal. Jaron was released from prison after serving 18 years. He reached out to me through a mutual acquaintance, asking if we could meet. I declined. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. Some relationships, once destroyed, should stay destroyed. I had forgiven him enough to wish him well. I had forgiven him enough to hope he found redemption. But I had not forgiven him enough to let him back into my life. I lived to see my 75th birthday. I lived to see my cancer-free anniversary reach 20 years. I lived to see the world change and evolve around me. I lived a full, rich life filled with purpose and meaning and love. And I never forgot what it felt like to discover that the people closest to me had been poisoning me. I never forgot the moment I understood that betrayal could come wrapped in concern. I never forgot the taste of that realization, and I used that memory to fuel my determination to help others, to warn others, to make sure that what happened to me never happened to anyone else. If you or someone you love is fighting a serious illness, take control of your own medications. Don't let anyone else manage them, no matter how much you trust them. Verify your prescriptions. Ask questions. Be vigilant. Because poison can hide in plain sight, and the people we love most are sometimes the ones who hurt us deepest. But with awareness and action, we can protect ourselves. We can survive. We can win.